What I would like to do for the next 45 to 50 minutes is, well, you choose the analogy. If you are a thrill seeker, let's put you on the top of the longest water slide in the world that ends up having you go about 50 miles an hour when you hit the water below. Just hang on. If you're not a thrill seeker, then pretend like you're a fire and I'm a fire hose and I'm just going to turn on the water full strength. Either way, I'm planning on giving you a lot of information in a short amount of time, because what I do is I want to whet your appetite. I want you to be able to look through this and say, you know what, this kind of makes sense, but I need to know a little bit more information. Because when I work with a congregation, I do not come once, deliver something, and immediately we're good to go. No, it's 3 to 4 visits before we get going. I've already visited with some of you. In fact, I recognize a few faces. I know it wasn't that long ago that I was here. May, right? It was May, yeah. So some of what you guys, you already see is up here, but I wanted to let everybody see it to get this global picture. And then once you've got this information, you can kind of look at it and say, yeah, that, first of all, that makes sense. That Flunker guy kind of knows what he's talking about. Or better yet, his wife is really good looking, so he must be an okay guy. Either way, my goal is to get back here in order to spend 2 hours training you. It's at that training session when we really get down and dirty, we get our hands dirty, and we start to really finagle, and we make the ministry yours. It would be so far easier if I could just say, look, just do this. But honestly, if I did that, you would miss opportunities. You would miss using your gifts. Because if I told you what to do, it'd be the way I did it. And you'd be trying imitating me. And trust me, as my wife will tell you, forget it. You can't, there's no reason to imitate me. I am crazy. I am nuts. All those hits in the head from that low-hanging branch, they have scrambled this. Therefore, I really want each congregation, the Wells, to look at their own gifts and say, yeah, this is what I can do. So today we're going to ride the wave. And we're going to do it quickly. And then later on this evening, I'm going to send this PowerPoint presentation to Pastor, and any of you says, I want to dive in a little bit deeper, he'll gladly send it to you. Because there aren't a lot of pictures in this one, purposely so I could keep it small. So bring the first slide up, dear, and make sure that all 4 points get up there. Oh, all 4 points are up there. All those times I hit my head on that low-hanging branch, I am a fire, aim, ready guy. How deep is the water? I'll figure out when I hit it. I just dive in. And I realize that not too many people think that way. Therefore, I've tried to create a little bit of a system that everybody can use on their own and make it their own, but a little bit of a system. How do we look at the overview of reaching out interculturally, reaching out into your community to a different culture? My 4 steps are on the board, on the screen. First and foremost, you got to make contact. Making contact means you have to create the first step. It does not do well to open the doors and say, we're here, come by us. They won't. You got to make the first contact. Secondly, once you make contact, there needs to be a relationship. Now, I'm not talking about doing it with my 20-year-old daughter now and every other night she's going out with a guy. No, I'm talking about having some kind of a connection. Something that puts you on the same plane. And I'm convinced, and you'll see it a little later, I'm convinced that using EIO, English Improvement Opportunities, helping them improve their English will put you on the same plane. That will give you a relationship. Once you got that relationship, don't ever forget to speak the truth. In other words, you're not going to alter the gospel or your message based on the person you're talking about. You're going to be straightforward. And you're going to hear some things that are going to be different. You're going to hear from Hispanics how they pray. In fact, many of them put us to shame. The problem is that their prayers never go to God. They go to the Virgin Mary, and they go to the saint of the day. So they'll talk about a huge prayer life, and you're going to need to use your own gifts and temper them to be able to speak that truth. When they talk about Mary, you're going to have to say, well, that's a dead end. And do it in such a way. Why? Because finally, you need to stay on target. And that comes out of my love for Star Wars. In the first film, which was number 4, forget it. In the first film that came out, number 4, Luke Skywalker has to destroy the Death Star, and he goes in and he is bombarded left and right. He's got people talking in his earpiece. He's got the Force talking to him, and all you hear is, stay on target, stay on target. That's what we need to do as individuals in the congregation. We do that when we know what our goal is. And I will help you develop those goals. But once we have those goals, we stick to those goals. We don't want, oh, this is a shiny little object, or as we do in our house, squirrel. No. We need to stay on target. If we keep these 4 things in mind, we will be well suited to use the gifts that God has given us individually and collectively to reach out with the gospel in an intercultural way. Let's hit the next slide. We're going to go through these quickly. What do we need to know first? Keep pushing the button there. We need to talk about our culture. We need to talk about what is culture. Keep going there. We need to how we view and critique culture. We need to talk about our prospects. We need to talk about their culture. Keep going. This is the fire hose part. We need to talk about our culture. I'm going to just put the next thing up, and I'll let you read it. There are a lot of big words in that sentence. In fact, I think there are only 2 sentences in that whole thing. I apologize. There's only 1 sentence in that paragraph. Pull it straight out of a textbook in college that talks about culture. Now I'll make it easy for you. Hit the next slide. In a sense, you can do this to 3 things. Number 1, culture is what you believe, it's what you share, and it's who you are. How many of you are Packer fans? You can raise your hands. See if my wife raised her hand. She knows that. I would not have known you're a Packer fan unless you raised your hand. Now, I could have done some guessing. Let's see, I'm 35 minutes north of Lambeau Field. Some of you are dressed in green. Some of you are... No. I could do some guessing, but I don't know until you share it. Now, you believe it, but until you share it. And in the end, culture really is who you are. Next go there. How do we observe culture? Is my preschool teacher for Trinity Coleman here today? Shucks, it's going to use her to, that's okay. When you work with young children, you always talk about the 5 senses, right? You really get them to open up and use all of their senses, because we become pretty eye dominant. You're missing culture if you're not using your sense of taste. You're missing culture if you're not using your sense of hearing. Now, I'm not saying it's good. Second weekend, my wife and I were in Mexico City. We got abruptly aware of culture, and it drowned our ears. 4 houses down, they decided to have a Saturday night party. Started at 10. They must have had the world's biggest bass speaker, because I saw my wife's heart beat. I mean, it was, and that went till about, what, 2 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning? You can't, you could say and read in a book, oh, they have late parties in Mexico City. You don't know that culture until you hear that culture. And we do ourselves a disservice if we limit our observation of culture only to 1 sense. No, use all 5 senses to observe culture. Now, how do we critique culture? That's where it gets difficult, because we end up critiquing culture through our own culture. In other words, we start talking about immediately what's good and what's bad, not based on them, but based on us. Go to the next slide. What we need to do is to try to critique culture entirely on them. And I'm going to expose you to 5 cultural tendencies. I don't want to take a long time. I could take an hour, but I won't. But one of the biggest cultural differences between Hispanics and you and I is the clock. You and I are relatively governed by time. In fact, I had a wonderful usher before church who was watching the 9:29, 9:30 on the little box above so he know when to press the button to ring the bells. And I guarantee you, if he was not pressed correctly at that time, most of you sitting out here would have gone, uh-oh, something's wrong with him. Did he have a heart attack? Did he have a stroke? Is he okay? I'm sorry, I made fun of you. Because you and I are governed by time. We lead our lives by the clock. Most of the world does not, and your Hispanic neighbors don't either. Even though they live in a time-dominant society, there's some things that they do govern. They got to be at work at 5:30, they're at work at 5:30. Because they know if they're there at 5:40, they might lose their job after a while. So they'll adjust that way. But when it comes to things that are a matter of the heart, matter of a family, time is no longer an issue. So when we say we're going to do something, we put a time out there, we have to understand that they're not looking at that time, they're looking at the event. And we have to be patient and flexible to accept that not coming at 5:30, okay, they came at 5:40, nothing's wrong with them. And nothing's wrong with us. It's just the way they look at the event. I think there are a couple things in there I got in there. Yeah. This tendency affects us especially when we begin to think that if somebody doesn't show up on time, we're doing something wrong. No, not at all. It's the way they look at it. So if we're going to hold an EIO, an English improvement class, and we say we're going to start at 6, and no one's there at 6, you haven't done anything wrong. Nor are they bad people. They're just gathering their wits together to come when they get there. The great thing is once they're there, they don't necessarily count the minutes to be done. You and I kind of do that. Now, I noticed you didn't do that too much while I was preaching today, and I'm glad that you were polite in that way. But I bet that the pastor there probably from time to time, especially if he gets just a little bit long in that second part, those of you sitting 2/3 of the way church back, you start flexing your elbow and your wrist, and you go like this. Because your time orientation not just has a starting point, it has an ending point. Now, maybe you got someplace to go because you've stacked up times. Or maybe you're looking like, oh, that noon game is coming awfully close, and I got some blots I got to put on a girl ahead of time. Hispanics don't look at their watches. Which means once they're there, you got them. Mexico City Church, real quick story. I'd start church at 10:15. It said 10 o'clock out front. 10:15, I started only because all the gringos were there and they were really getting anxious. 10:25, people walk in. 10:45, people walk in. 11:15, people walk in. And then I had my blessing, my benediction family. I always walked in at the benediction. They also traveled 2 hours by bus to get to church. But once they were there, we had a Bible class after worship. I think my shortest Bible class was 2.5 hours. Because once they're there, they're not thinking about leaving. They're not thinking about taking off. They want to be there. That's their event. Now, you and I are going to compromise a little bit. We're going to be fungible on the front side of EIO, but we'll say that at 7:30 we'll be done. And they'll be okay with that, even if they walked in at 7 o'clock. Because they understand the cultural difference. We need to as well. Next slide. Another tendency, trust. Confianza. Just go ahead and put the whole screen up there. Hispanics require the ability to know who you are before they trust you. That may take a while. That's okay. Because once they trust you, you got it made. Dear friend of mine, I haven't seen him face to face in 12 years. Still a dear friend. I'm his daughter's godparent, whom I baptized on Good Friday of 2005. Salvador, 2 weeks ago, sent me a text. Hey, who's your favorite mechanic? I haven't texted Salvador for almost a year and a half. But because he knows me and he trusts me, he figures, well, the guy I go to is the guy he should go to. That's confianza. I also know that if anything happens religiously with Salvador, and this happens 4 to 6 times a year, he'll call me. I haven't seen him face to face, but because of that confianza, we strive to have our ministry geared towards establishing that confianza. And once we got it, Hispanic families will start inviting you to their family parties. Then you know you're made. By the way, great food. Use the taste buds. Next slide. Superior-inferior relationships. We have to be careful to understand that the Hispanics understand that they are a minority. They think like a minority. They look at us as being way up here. We have to scale ourselves down. We need to try to bring them up, to try to create an even. Now, we're not going to do that on a society level, but we certainly can do it at a religious level, a spiritual level, to show that we are in the same boat. That's a cultural tendency. Because they are a minority, they walk into any situation thinking, I can't do anything. We need to raise that up. Next slide. I would imagine that at a congregation like Trinity and Coleman, you already got extended family. Probably this morning there were at least 2 generations of one family, if not 3 generations of one family worshiping together. That's a blessing. So you know this cultural tendency. You know how important family is to you. You know that when someone celebrates a birthday party, everybody with that last name gets together. Even if they live 15, 20 minutes away. That's what you do. Take that tendency and put it on steroids, and that's what you have in the Hispanic culture. Everybody does everything together, which is great for us, because you and I don't have to spend so much energy trying to cast a huge wide net. We're going to try, but once we get an inroad with 1 or 2 people, we have an inroad to their entire family network, which in some places can number in the 50s. In fact, when I go to communities and I work with new congregations in an established Hispanic community that has Hispanic churches around there, I will go and I will interview or talk to the Spanish pastors, and I will find in most places that congregation is a congregation of one family. 50 to 60 people, but everyone who goes to that congregation belongs to that one family. Which makes it tough for other Hispanics to go there because they're not part of the family. We're going to take this tendency, we're going to reach in, but we're going to widen it. Because we're going to show here that there are a lot of different families, and that this is the family of believers. That's the one to belong to. Next slide. Cultural Christianity. I mentioned it in the sermon, and I could spend years. I'll try not to, although I will bring it up more in the training if we get to that section in the future. When a Hispanic says they're Catholic, it does not mean what you think it means. Hispanics don't know the Bible. In fact, they don't know the Catholic Catechism. They don't know who Jesus is, other than they know Jesus was born and they know Jesus died. And those are the 2 celebrations religiously that they do every year, probably without fail. Christmas Eve and Good Friday. But the rest they do not know. What they have is traditional built up, which actually has a lot of roots in pagan theology. My wife's birthday coming up here soon is on November the 2nd. November the 2nd in Mexico is Day of the Dead. Everybody you talk to today, oh, that's a Catholic. Hey, that's what the Catholics celebrate. No. Day of the Dead is pagan. It's ancestry worship. It was in Mexico hundreds of years before the peninsular Spanish people came to conquer the area. But the church has absorbed it and made their own. And that's the type of reality that people know today. You and I take this reality and we scale way back. In fact, the first months of knowing somebody and working with them religiously, we're just letting them know who Jesus is. He walked on water. He changed water into wine. Although I'm finding out more and more people, Hispanics know that story. But they don't know he cast out demons. They don't know the parables. They love the parables. It's parables of stories. Everybody gets a story. They don't know the parables. They don't know Jesus as true God and true man through his actions. We're going to go a long way in sharing God's word with them just by simply relating who Jesus is. Those are the cultural tendencies. Keep going on. Next one. What can we do to do something? There's ESL, there's EIO, there's Welcome Wagon. Keep going. And then finally, there is community events. There should be 1 to 2 more. And I think there's a picture, dear. There we go. As I have looked at this area, as I have already spoken with you, as I've already kind of surveyed, the EIO, English as an Improvement Opportunity, I believe is the best way for your congregation to go forward. Why not the others? Very simply, where you're located. By the time Hispanics get to this part of Wisconsin, this part of the United States, this part of the world, they've been exposed to English about 3 to 5 years. If any of you have worked with Hispanics, a group always has 1, maybe 2, who have a passable English ability. They could walk in right now and hold a very casual, low-key conversation with you. But they will make a lot of mistakes because they have not received 2 things. 1, true training. They did not study this. They learned English like I learned Spanish, out on the street. They learned what I called survival English. The vocabulary consists of what's important for work, perhaps grocery store, liquor store. They don't know how to amplify. And the one area where they make the most mistakes, not surprisingly, is in the verb. Because the English language treats the verb like a donkey. The English language has crummy verb principles. In Spanish, in fact, in most languages in the world, you have a verb by its ending. You know exactly what the verb is saying. But if I say the word play, someone doesn't know, is it I play? Is it you play? Is it we play? Is it they play? You have to look for something else, entirely different word. Whereas if I say amas, anybody who speaks Spanish knows you love. It's right there in the word. It's connected. So the EIO, the English Improvement Opportunity, takes the reality that they already know some English, and it helps fill in the gaps through a practicing methodology. In fact, we'll explain that in the next couple of slides. Go ahead and hit the next few. You guys know, whoa, yep, I know. Most of these have 2 or 3, so way to stay on it, dear, thank you. EIO, it's a means of meeting people of a specific target group by appealing to perceived needs. Every Hispanic that I've talked to in the United States, where they've been here for 6 months or 6 years, tell me, help me improve my English. They don't, 2 things are going on. Number 1, they want to become a greater part of the community. They don't want to stick out. And they know that other than their characteristics, the one thing that makes them stick out is their speech. So they want to improve their speech. In fact, in Green Bay, their characteristics even hide. In the first couple of years I was working in Green Bay, I'd walk down the street and I'd run into people and I'd start talking Spanish and they'd look at me. They were a Oneida Indian. Dark skin, same old face. I just assumed, no. There's many Oneida Indians as there are Hispanics in Green Bay. So now so they can hide themselves that way. But as soon as they talk, and it's not even so much accent, it's making a mistake, a grammatical mistake that you and I recognize. And the first 1-2 times, it's no big deal. But if we're talking for a long time and they're making the same mistake over and over again, it kind of irritates us a little. Now, if it's grandpa, and I had a grandpa. My grandpa was born in Hortonville, lived in this part of Wisconsin his entire life. And every time, he'd always put an S after the verb when he used you. Use talks. He'd always do that. I get it. He must have had relatives in the UP, I don't know, but that's all he did. Okay, I get that. I'm his grandson. I saw him, 5 days every 3 years because I lived in Puerto Rico? I get that. But if you've got constant contact with that person, it gets to be a little bit irritating. And even if you don't say anything, your body language speaks volumes. And the person knows, I didn't say something right. But they don't know what they didn't say right. In an EIO, we get to sit down and we get to correct those mistakes. And we get to do it in such a way that they are able to practice it almost ad infinitum until they feel comfortable. It's also a way of gaining trust. If I help somebody not look like a fool on the street, they've got trust in me. There's that confianza. Now they're going to be much more open when I talk to them about a Savior, when I talk to them about religious issues. And by the way, by that time, they're probably already asking questions, culturally and personally. And one of the questions that the young mothers will ask is, does your pastor do baptisms? Because they want their children baptized. Traditionally. They really don't even know what baptism does. For them, baptism makes them a member of the church. They belong to the church. There's a greater chance of going to heaven. Okay. They don't see the forgiveness, but they want them baptized. And for your pastor to sit down with a family of 3 kids, ages 8 to 4, that haven't been baptized, and be able to explain baptism with a willing, open audience, amen. Amen. Next slide. What are the realities of EIO? We need patience. We need repetition. We need consistency. Here's the point in the where you start saying, is this something I can do? I'm not a patient person. Then maybe it's not for you, or I'll make you a patient person. The patience comes more in the reality that when you sit down in an EIO, you are not doing the bulk of the work. You are listening to someone practice. In fact, in a given 10-minute segment, and that's not, and we go for 50 minutes, but in 10 minutes, you may be talking for 1 minute of those 10 minutes. Your students are talking the other 9 minutes. Because the whole point is to get them to repeat it 100, 200, 300 times. Not repetition of the exact same thing. No, we create a pattern and we work through the patterns, and they're saying a few different things, but they're repeating the pattern. It's up to them to do it. And so as a volunteer, as a person working in an EIO situation, I can sit there and I can listen. Hey, great job. Next. All right. Whoops. You missed it. Let's go back. Let's look at the pattern again. You talked for about 15 seconds. They repeat it. They got it. And you just go through that. The consistency comes with offering. Do I do this once a week? Do I do it twice a week? Do I do it for 8 weeks, take a 2-week break, offer it again? We need to develop a pattern. We can't just say, oh, I'll go now, and then, oh, we'll stay when we do it again. Because we're talking about event-oriented people who struggle with time. They're not going to look at their calendar and say, oh, okay. No, we need to create something. Oh, every Tuesday night I come to church to practice my English. They develop that pattern, it becomes an event for them. If it's an event, they'll be here. In fact, they want to be here. But the only reason they're not here is either they have to work or it's snowing. They don't like snow. Trust me, I know, I don't like snow either. And I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin, for crying out loud. Next slide. Hey, forgot the friendship part. I've got 3 there. That's okay, keep going. No, keep going, keep going, keep going. Here's where I'm just going to expose this to you because I really want you later on to work through this. Oh, back up, sorry, thank you. Keep the contacts in short sessions once or twice a week, and I think as we were talking about, we're looking at once a week. I think it makes all the sense in the world, especially given the type of work Hispanics are doing, the way that their schedules may change from morning shifts to afternoon shifts. I mean, it's all over the place. Let's do it once a week. Let's not try to, no, once a week. Do it for 90 minutes, realizing we've got a fungible 20-minute start time, which will give them a full 45 to 50 minutes of work with them, which, by the way, for their brain and my brain is enough. I mean, we put ourselves through unique realities when we go to college and try to learn Greek and Hebrew, because that's not natural. Spending 15 minutes practicing something, repeating it the next week and the third week after that, they know it. They know the pattern. They're able to use it. That's what we're trying to do. We need to give them the opportunity for repetitive practice, and we need to focus on the small group. One of the things that I emphasize in working in EIO is that you take the number of volunteers, divide it by 2. That's how many volunteers are going to work on a given evening. So if we get 10 volunteers, take that number 5. 5 volunteers are going to work in a given evening. Now take that number 5, multiply it by 3. I know there's a lot of math, I'm sorry, but it's easy math. Which means that 5 volunteers once a week can handle 15 people. Don't go above 15 people. Limit yourselves. Create a waiting list. Let people know. As soon as people drop out or can't make it back, I'll call you and you can come. Because that does 2 things. 1, it keeps you in control of the situation and in control, comfortable with yourself. Number 2, it creates a little bit of a buzz in the community. Ooh, they got something good and I can't get there yet. And when a little slot opens up and they can jump right in, it makes all the difference in the world. Next slide. All this is what is needed to run an EIO. Should be 2 more. That's up, thank you. I would be looking for somebody in this congregation whose name does not start with the title pastor. That would like to be person who runs it. Now please understand, running it means probably spending 10 minutes a week. Making sure the photocopies are there, making sure I got enough volunteers. But we do need somebody where the buck stops here. I've worked for 12 years on this kind of stuff. I've tried different approaches. If we don't have a director, it falls apart after a while. As the old saying go, too many cooks and not enough, too many cooks in the kitchen. You need one head cook. Now, that does not mean that head cook has to spend a ton of time, like I said, or a ton of effort. In fact, we lay everything out for them. But we do need kind of a buck stops here person. What we're looking for are team volunteers. The more individuals interested, the longer we can sustain the ministry, because the less you will get burnt out. If we have 10 volunteers working with 5 on a given weekend, or a given week, that means the other 5 don't have to be involved. And usually what I do is I set up a cycle of 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how the volunteers want to work it. Some volunteers say, you know what, I'll work for these 8 weeks and I have to take the next 8 weeks off. That's fine. What you're doing is you're cycling through, and 2 great blessings happen. Number 1 is personal. Because I have found over the years, no one likes to commit to something that has no end date. Even when you commit to being a parent, that has no end date. A lot of people don't want to commit to being parents anymore. No end date. No one wants to say, yeah, I'll volunteer to mow the lawn. Well, at least there's an end date there, unless you have to shovel snow then. No, they want to say, I'll do it for this week, I'll do it for this time. Let's do the same thing here. You know what? I can work for these 4 weeks, but then I have to travel to do this, or then I have to take care of this, or my garden's going to need attention. Fine, because we'll have another group of people coming in. So you really avoid the classic volunteer burnout. The second thing is actually it's extremely beneficial for the student, for the person coming, because they get to meet more people from church. They get to talk to other people at church, so that eventually when the Lord leads them to walk into church, they're not just looking for the back of the head of the one person they've worked with for infinitum, but they see several heads of several people they've worked with. And it increases that comfort level, increases it greatly. So the whole idea is to get as many people involved as possible. But then recognizing we're going to go through cycles, which means we can adjust. If we've got 10 to 50, we got 10 volunteers, we do 5 at a time, and then some people need to take a longer break. Now we're only down to 6 volunteers, work with 3 at a time. We bring our pool of students down. You see, we can control that. And there's nothing wrong with controlling that, because our focal point is to create a relationship. Look, if all you're interested is in getting the Hispanic people around you to speak better English, send them down the road to the community college and give them $100. Because that's what the community college does professionally. But that's not what we're hoping to do, at least I pray not. We're hoping to develop that relationship so we can share Jesus with them, so we can control the people we're working with. Not the people, the number of people. You start getting big heads here. Oh, I can control puppeteer time. No, we can adjust the number of people we're working with. And we'll develop a lot closer relationship. Throw the next slide up, please. Thank you, you've already done that. And what does this all lead to? It all leads to gospel outreach. It all leads to the opportunity that pastor on an organized level, and that's where I do ask for the guy with the word pastor in front of me work. But the truth is that each one of you will find opportunities on your own to express your faith as you're working with that student. You will. It's just a natural byproduct of being a baptized Christian. And the truth is, the longer the Hispanics know you, the more they ask questions of you. And every now and then they get a little personal, and you can say, I'm sorry, cross the line, and they understand that. But they want to know more about you. Remember that cultural tendency of superior and inferior? Hispanics in this part of the United States want to be like you. Now, if you look in the mirror this morning, that may be a little scary. If you look at your own life for the last month, that may be a little scary. But the minority always wants to be like the majority. It's a sociological reality. My wife and I went to Mexico City. We lived there for 3 years. We tried to imitate a lot of things, to become part of the group. Now, certain things you didn't, and that's okay. But for the most part, you try hard. Hispanics are trying hard. And one way they know is to start asking a lot of questions. And it's not just practical questions. It's questions about behavior, questions about relationships, questions about how you work with this situation, or have you ever been treated like this, and how can I work? I mean, there are a lot of, and each one of those questions opens up a door to share the gospel. Now, you don't have to every time say, and Jesus died on the cross, to share the gospel. Finally, our second reading from 1 Peter, be prepared and everything to say what you believe. Well, I treat my neighbor with love, even as he continues to throw garbage over his fence into my yard. In fact, one of the living ways I do it is I bought a trash can, put it on his yard, and I put the trash back in it. You didn't have to mention Jesus there, but you did, because you were talking about love. How does a Christian act? These are the type of situations that arise. Now notice, those last 2 slides, that's where I dive into a much deeper detail. That specific training. We lay that out very expansively, and I give you time to practice. More so with the EIO class stuff, But even then, when we start talking about faith, we'll put a few examples out there, and we'll do some opening up. Some of us do it naturally, some of us not so naturally. That's okay. Because these are all opportunities. The third thing, and I think this is the last slide. Go ahead and hit it, because I did not put a slide here, and I'm starting to develop it, so the next presentations for the next church, I apologize. One of the other things that I do with you in that training session is to help you manage expectations. I have found over the years that very often a church will have in your mind, well, if I reach out to Hispanics, this is what's going to happen. And it could be as far away as the sun is from the earth. I will actually put out some expectations for you and help you gear them so that you realize what they are and you can manage them. For example, one of the expectations that you and I may have is, well, they know about Jesus. They're going to come to 9:30 worship every morning on Sundays now. What time is it now, dear? You have a watch on? It's about 11? 11:21. I would say right now in the Hispanic community in Coleman, Wisconsin, about half of the people are awake. Sunday morning is not a culturally wake-up morning for... In fact, in Latin America, as counselors and consultants, we tell all of our pastors, don't start church before 11. You're not going to get people to come. So 9:30 is not, do not expect, do not have an expectation that your church at 9:30 on Sunday morning is going to be filled with Hispanics 2 months down the road. No, it's not. You're going to be sharing God's word. You're going to let the Spirit do its work. You're going to let that Spirit create faith. And then as you go forward, you're going to look at other opportunities. One of them might be, if you're meeting on a Tuesday night, I don't know if that's tonight or not, you're meeting on a Tuesday night, you have the class, you may find that a very short liturgical devotion with an English message that lasts a half an hour with some music in English and Spanish that I can provide you will be exactly what fits their bill. They're all there, and they're all coming together. And since it'll be in English, the volunteers can all follow. They can worship too. That may be more appropriate for them. That's what I mean by manage expectations. Or you may say, wow, this is going so well, I got some people, maybe I have to start an 11 o'clock service. I'm not saying that publicly. But I mean, the options are open here, wide open. Especially since you have worship so early in the morning. I'm still a late guy. I loved Mexico City, worshiping, even though that doesn't mean we didn't get home till sometimes 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Sundays. But see, since I'm not a Packer fan, it's an event, and my Sunday does not screech to a halt between 12 and 3 when they're on the early game, or between 3:45 and whatever. In fact, last Sunday they were playing, I was on an airplane going to Laredo, Texas. Much later, I found out that it was not a good day for Packer fans last Sunday. But I didn't lose any sleep over it. It's a good day for Dolphin fans. They won. They beat the Patriots. They beat the Patriots last Sunday. It was close, but they beat them. Today will be different. So, that is my information to you about at that 45-minute range, what I thought it would be. And yes, I fire hosed you, or I put you off the top of the slipper slide and you just went straight down. But that's the point. I wanted to give you as much information as possible for you guys to start thinking. And you guys are a little bit ahead of the game because I've given some of this information in the past. And so we've already started thinking about it. In fact, I think we've already talked a little bit about a timeline, haven't we? Yeah. I would encourage you to take this now in a larger group and go back and look at that timeline again and start to ask whatever you do as a church, calling personally, putting out a sign-up sheet, whatever you do as a church, say, here is when we'd like to offer a training session. And by the way, training does not mean you're signing up. Training means you're being trained. If you think you can't do it, you walk away from the training saying, I can't do it. And I'm okay with that. I'd rather you say after the training I can't do it than before the training I can't do it. Because often you get trained and you go, oh, I can do it. So if you're interested at all, come to the training and then figure out if you can volunteer or not volunteer. But I think that's the next step in my mind. Let's get some of this stuff. Let's find 2 hours, and maybe it's a Saturday, maybe it's a Sunday afternoon when the Packers aren't playing like this afternoon or whatever. Or maybe it's already in the spring. Whatever works best for you. Let's get this out in front. Let's run through. In other words, let me take the fire hose and dial it down to a garden hose. In fact, let me put a spit on the end and turn it off from time to time so we can absorb it. And then begin the actual day-to-day nuts and bolts planning of getting some ministry out there in front of you. Any questions? Anything I say this morning scare you? Good. Either that or you're also comatose already and the coffee didn't do its trick. Anything I say this morning surprise you? Wow, you guys are either an easy audience or you're just looking to get home. I don't know. Good. Sure.
From the point where we're at right now, and you know what we've got to go through at, realistically, how long before we have?
Ordinarily, I would say, I'm going to answer this question 2 ways. Ordinarily, I would say that after this type of a session, congregations usually take about a month to kind of work through it internally, or 2 months, depending on what else is going on. I mean, you've got a few things, you had a fair amount of announcements at the end of church, you got a few things going on, whatever. So you have to decide how do you want to wrestle with it. Then it's another 1 or 2 times for training, so 1 or 2 weeks. And then it's anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks to get information out to the community, set stuff up. Now, you're in northern Wisconsin. Snow's going to start to, I mean, I hate to say it, but we could have snow in October. I really hate to say that. And I hear from Farmer's Almanac that we're supposed to be cold and snowy this year again. Yeah, some of you are not yet, you heard the same thing. Yeah, because of that, it is my humble yet somewhat insistent recommendation that we try not to start something before the snow flies. Because I don't know if we're necessarily going to get the type of traction that would be good. I have where congregations get all gung-ho, they get out there, they do something, and then it gets really cold, and then, wow, we did that, but now it's going to take 3 to 4 months to get back up. My observation would be is that I would encourage you to look to starting something early spring next year. 2 reasons. 1, Hispanics get a lot more active when they see the snow melting. And so they're more likely to go out. Even if it does snow in March, they're more likely to come out because they see there's a future. It snows in October, they get in a huddle-up mode and forget it. The other thing is that there are advantages with the EIO engaging the community in social events. You do EIO for 4 to 6 weeks, and then you have a little fiesta. And you invite the whole family, which means a lot of kids. You'd like to do that outside. You'd like to maybe set something up outside for kids and adults to do. Tough to do that if you start in November and it's January. Now, you may plow your yard, and you may all dress up in your nice bundle of clothes. You may outside, oh, it's nothing. I snowmobile in colder weather. That's great. You're used to it. They're not. So because of that, I often encourage congregations that work north of the Mason-Dixon line, or basically the snow belt, don't start something. For the very first time, don't start it in late fall, early winter. Start it in early spring. Now, you get all gung-ho, I'm ready to work with you. But then we're going to have to manage expectations. Which means that there may actually be 2 starts, in my opinion. At least that's been my experience. So, it answers the question both ways. Once you decide, and I always tell congregations, set a date that you want to start and let's work backwards 6 to 8 weeks. And we can populate that pretty easily. And then if we're working backwards, say, oh, wait a minute, this is going on, that's going on, then we adjust our start date. based on what we see happening. That's kind of an ongoing conversation. Sometimes it happens around training. Sometimes it just happens in emails. Sometimes it happens if you, is your evangelism board kind of driving this, Pastor? Is that, or is planning committee driving this? You have a planning committee meeting, and I happen to be in the state of Wisconsin, I'll come to the planning committee meeting. I'll sit down with you. And we'll throw some spaghetti at the wall. We'll see what dates stick, and we'll look back and forth. And that way you can make some solid decisions, but also based on some community reality, not just, oh, this really works for us. Well, yeah, but you also think about the community you're reaching. And it's been my experience. We started something in Algoma, Wisconsin, first week in November. And they said, yeah, we just want to do it for the 4 weeks in November, then we know. Hispanics take a break from the 12th of December to the 6th of January. That is their Christmas break. 12th of December is the patron saint of Mexico, Maria's Day, Maria Guadalupe, and January 6th is Epiphany. So there's nothing happening there. Okay. Well, if I start something in November, I only go 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and then I got to take a 6-week break, and then I got to restart. Okay, what happens if that first Tuesday I restart, it actually snows that day? No one's coming. Well, now it's just almost like I'm spinning and I'm restarting and I'm not getting that traction, which is funny because we're talking about snow. I would rather put you in a place where you're the train on the top of a hill and you don't have to just go downhill with it, rather than up and down and up and down. That's where I want to be with you. So that's why I encourage, I think it was one of the emails we talked about, I encourage you to look more towards Ash Wednesday type time, although Ash Wednesday is early this is the later one. This is the later one, that's right. It's March, first week in March I think is what it falls into. That made sense to me based on location. And I think if you sit in the planning committee, we wrestle with that, we talk back and okay, and maybe we say Ash Wednesday is great, but there's a lot of it going on. Then the week after Ash Wednesday, it's close enough. We can massage that. So that's my answer. Because that way I'm like Jell-O. You can't nail me to anything. The whole point of this morning is to try to convince you of two things. Number one, yes, I can do it. Number two, it's going to be your ministry. So I am going to work as hard as I possibly can and be as fungible as I possibly can to make sure it's your gifts, your abilities. Not, well, what does Flunker say? I'll do what Flunker says. I'll give you some principles. I'll give you a bosquejo, an outline, a backbone. But you need to put the muscle and the veins and the tissue and the cartilage, you need to put in the skin on it. So it looks like you. Because if it looks like me, it's not going to work well. None of you think like me. That's okay. God forbid you think like me. You need to think the way you think in your place. And in the end, you're the experts in Coleman, Wisconsin. You live here. You know this area. You know what works. I just have this great overview that I'm going to try to help marry with what you know. But it's got to be you. It's not me. Any other questions? That was a very good question, by the way. Good planning question. Yes, please. Thanks, dear.
When you mentioned Algoma, that's a fishing town.
Yep.
So was it easy to start and not finish?
It was easy to start because the Hispanics there weren't involved with fishing, they were involved with dairy. Very similar to around here. So once we were able to get into some of the dairy farms and figure out some of the work schedules and understand who the Hispanics were reaching, and in that time, this is 12 years ago also, at that time in Algoma, there weren't a lot of families. There were a lot of, well, the families were all in Latin America yet. They hadn't brought their families up. So we're dealing with a lot of middle-aged men. Middle-aged, I suppose, 25 to 45. Is that middle-aged? Because that makes me old, and that's okay, I won't. Middle-aged men, 25 to 45. No family spousal commitment. So we were able to do some adapting and really work, and then we had to shut the doors because everybody wanted to do it. And I only had like maybe 6 volunteers in the evening, so the most I could do was 18 guys in the evening. And then I had 27, 28 sign up. So we had to do some maneuvering, and that it got going. What's unique that happened is that it went for about a year and a half. And then the bulk of these guys brought their families up. Great, you want to be a family. Well, then they didn't have all the time when they wanted the time. And the way that Algoma had organized it, and this is nothing against them, this is the reality, they weren't nimble enough to pivot on the changes that their clientele offered them, and it stopped. They stopped doing it. However, those guys know English a lot better, and one of the sons of the congregation who knows Spanish, who's now down in Tucson, Arizona, still occasionally keeps contact with you because he was involved in some of the work. He was in college at the time. He still keeps in contact with them. So if Algoma wants to resuscitate, is that the English word? Resurrect, that's a little religious. They want to do it, they've got something built in. But there it's dairy. And it went about, I'm going to say 17 months, I think, was the total run for that one. I'll add just one more thing. You talk about getting started, you talk about getting going. Once you do that, please understand that you really need to commit at least a year of effort, regardless of how good or how bad it seems it's going, in order to establish a community presence. If you try something, and a couple months later you say, boy, nobody just, or we only get 2 or 3 people, and you stop it, you've just burnt your bridge for the next generation of Hispanics in this area. Because Hispanics, as a minority, look at activities and they look at how many times things are started, how many times things are stopped. And they will remember, yep, they tried, they really didn't care about us because they quit it. What I've kind of found is if you go for a year and it just doesn't grow and then you quit, they say, oh yeah, you tried, we failed. So that year seems to be that magical thing. So I always tell people, prepare to give it a year. Some places 18 months, but a good year. The truth is that it's rare. There are the occasional places like Algoma where they just didn't quite pivot on the changes that happened. But that was a pretty dramatic change. Almost every place that I've worked with that starts something still has it going. Now, COVID created some issues, but it still has it going because they're able to pivot based on the needs. Grand Island, Nebraska started 9 years ago. I have to look at my diary or my minutes. 9 or 8 years ago I went out there, worked with them. Meatpacking plant. Meatpacking plant shut down. So suddenly the large numbers, dwindled down to maybe a half a dozen people. They kept going. They were able to pivot on what they were providing. And then they think now, I just talked to the guy, they think now that post-COVID it's going to come back up again with a new group of people. They're ready to pivot one way, depending on who comes in town. In fact, they may be looking at not even reaching Hispanics, they may be looking to reach Sudanese. Still with an EIO, still with an approach, still with a desire, but because that may very well be the next immigrant population in Grand Island, Nebraska. Here I am talking about Grand Island, Nebraska immigrant population. But that's what happens in the United States. It's great. So, any other questions, concerns? Packers don't play today. You're not anxious to get someplace, are you?
The Brewers are on at 1.
Oh, the Brewers are on at 1. I'm sorry. Well, and since it's a home game, yeah, you can watch it on TV. You know what? I'll probably listen to Euchre on the radio. It's much more fun to listen than watching on TV. I have to mow my yard this afternoon before the next 2 days of rain make it a jungle. So, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much for the opportunity to preach today, to give your pastor a Sunday off. Pray about it, think about it, ask questions. I will send him this PowerPoint, and if you have any questions, you want to review something, get the PowerPoint from him. Pastor.
Just
if anyone's interested in learning more, I want to get your name on a list. And again, as Pastor Flunker said, if I put your name on a list, that's not a commitment.
No.
That's just trying
No.
to coordinate the next follow-up with everyone. So really, please, I don't want to pressure you, but I don't want you to, if it's something you would consider, put your name on the list. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Good brew crew. I guess that's what they say. I don't know. Enjoy your day. Thank you very much.